"The suspect should be considered armed and dangerous," is a direct quote from an alert made by the Newark Police Department on the 13th of October 2016. They were on the lookout for 26-year-old Newark native Jeremy Arrington in connection with a sexual assault case that involved a shooting 4 days prior on the 9th. A female friend of his had walked herself into the Beth Israel Hospital, where she would be treated for non-life-threatening injuries and made a full recovery, although the scars of that day would run deep and psychologically it would stay with her for the rest of her life. But weeks passed, and in November Jeremy was still on the loose. If he could commit such a heinous crime on a female friend, what did that mean for others around him? Shaken by the incident, a friend who's currently unnamed due to the graphic nature of this story we're about to go over shared that police alert on a Facebook post. But, ladies and gentlemen, the act of sharing this post would be the catalyst to an unthinkable and unimaginable series of events that took place over the course of an hour and a half at a property which is now labelled the House of Horrors. All the woman was doing was looking out for herself, her family, her loved ones, all who were known to Jeremy. She wanted to share his image around in the hopes of someone coming forward before he could act out again. Sadly though, he was able to strike before police could catch up with him. On the 5th of November 2016, in the 100 block of Hedden Terrace, Newark, New Jersey, a family known to Jeremy had sat down and ate breakfast together before enjoying each other's company as the hours passed. It was a typical winter's day. In the home is that 29-year-old unnamed woman who shared the post on Facebook, along with her 2 children, 7-year-old Ariel and 11-year-old Al Jahan. The kids' 13-year-old twin aunt and uncle are also present, along with their other aunt, Bilquis Karam, and her friend, 23-year-old Asia McBorrows. We only have the description of one more of the occupants, that of a young girl with autism, a family friend, but although we have 8 people listed, there were in fact 9 people who had been within the house on that November's afternoon. What none of them expected though was a monster at their front door, ready to kill over a Facebook post. I can't pinpoint an exact time as to when Jeremy turned up to the address, but all we know from what happened next is that somehow he got into the property, and once inside, to describe the scene as a house of horrors would be an understatement. Over the span of an hour and a half, Jeremy would tie all 9 occupants up, including those small children, and subjected them to a horrific ordeal, stabbing, mutilating, and torturing them before eventually killing 3 of them in the process. Survivor Bilquis Karam described some of what went down within the house. "I cannot unsee that. I want to unsee it," she said, as she recalled Jeremy putting a gun in her mouth and threatening to kill her. Her memory then jogs of hearing 7-year-old Ariel screaming as she's tied up in the bathroom. Jeremy had been torturing her. Those screams turned into silence as multiple knife blows were dealt, which originally rendered her unconscious. The same could be said for Al Jahan. Both children were eventually pronounced dead at hospital. Bilquis' friend Asia hadn't been known to Jeremy and had got close with the family after both girls had attended the same college together. They also worked at Amazon to make some extra money. Both girls had big dreams of making something of themselves. Sadly for Asia, she would never get to chase those dreams. She didn't make it out the house alive. Bilquis said Asia had pleaded with Jeremy to let her go. She didn't even know what had happened previously. She begged him to let her go. She didn't know him. That didn't matter though, because Jeremy stood over her execution style, and Asia was shot dead. It would be that 8th victim we named, the young girl with autism, the family friend, who would go on to save the day. She somehow managed to escape and ran for a closet where she picked up her phone, called a family member, and panicked but composed explained what had happened. The family member then called police, and moments later the ordeal was over. Jeremy fled the scene. He left 6 for dead. 3 of them did die, and all survivors will carry this horrific memory with them for the rest of their lives. So the hunt was on for Jeremy, and he was tracked down to a home roughly 1 mile away on Pomona Avenue. When police had the property surrounded, he claimed to have had a hostage inside. The threat was taken that more serious due to the nature of the crimes he had committed only hours before. Eventually though, he surrendered, and the hostage threat was later found out to be false. Jeremy was eventually charged with 28 counts, including 3 counts of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, burglary, criminal restraint, and weapons charges. He pled not guilty to the charges that were brought against him, so he went on trial in March of 2022. The trial was to last 10 days, but for whatever reason, none of the trial information was released to the public, more than likely due to the circumstances of the crime and how there were multiple child victims. But after that 10-day period, reporting restrictions were lifted, and we found out that Jeremy was found guilty on all counts that were brought against him. His attorney tried to argue an insanity defense, but the judge rejected this after no expert would testify that he was not liable for the 3 deaths due to his mental state. The jury was said to have taken less than 2 hours to come back with the guilty verdict.
Bill and Sade, Jeremy Arrington did this because he was upset because someone made a bad comment about him on social media. So he burst into that family's home. He separated kids from their mothers. He tied everyone up, and then he went around and stabbed everyone. And when they were crying and bleeding and screaming, he made his rounds again, stabbing them all over again. And you know what? It is amazing. It is a miracle that anyone survived. Ariel Little Whitehurst was just 7 years old. Her brother Al Jahan was 11. Judge Ronald Wigler recounted how Jeremy Arrington tortured these children, stabbing them to death.
Little Ariel Whitehurst sustained over 15 stab. One stab wound was inflicted with such force, the tip of the knife broke off in her skull. Little Al Jahan sustained over 12 stab wounds. You plunged the knife so hard and so deep through this young boy's back that it exited through his chest.
This was sentencing day for the man who turned the home at 137 Heaton Terrace into a house of horrors, where Arrington terrorized a family for nearly 2 hours back in 2016, shooting to death 23-year-old Syasia McBurrows, a family friend who was visiting. He repeatedly stabbed 2 14-year-olds, twins. 9 victims in all. 3 did not make it out alive.
Walk inside nobody's house and tie them up, stab them, shoot them. Damn you! He had no right to take my daughter's life or the other 2 kids. He's a punk.
Al Jahan and his sister will never. Oh God, excuse me. Oh God, I love them kids.
I could hear my niece screaming in the next room. Just screaming and screaming and screaming.
Arrington, whose criminal record spans decades, will never be free again. A 350-year sentence. That's 281 years before he'd ever see a parole board.
Even though people survived, their lives are forever changed as well. They have emotional pain, they have physical pain.
Judge Wigler called it the worst crime ever committed in Essex County, giving the family some measure of closure that Arrington is gone for good.
I hope you're somehow able to move on. I don't know how you're going to do it.
Jeremy was handed a 375-year prison sentence. He'll be eligible for parole after serving 281 years. Jeremy was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. This grisly case, just the latest in a string of violent offences against women. Not only had he been wanted for the sexual assault of a female friend in 2016, he had also been on bail for 2 separate attacks on an ex-girlfriend back 1 year prior in 2015. He had threatened to kill her in one incident in the presence of her child, and in the other incident he woke her up inside of her home, stood over her, and pointed a gun to her head, again threatening to kill her. It just so happened that the following year he'd do exactly the same thing over a Facebook post, but this time he executed those murders.